Next stop on the Autocrat Express, Vostochny Cosmodrome, where the supreme leader, respected comrade Kim Jong Un, descended the red-carpeted steps ready to meet his host. They shook hands for 40 seconds. When you've met your geostrategic soulmate, you don't want to let go. Come and see my new Cosmodrome, said President Putin. As the North Korean delegation was shown around, back home they were firing 2 short-range ballistic missiles in the general direction of Japan. They fell in the sea. But with access to the kind of technology Russia is developing at the spaceport, they might have a greater success rate. President Putin reportedly agreed to help Mr. Kim launch a satellite, possibly in exchange for ammunition to make up for the millions of rounds Russia has expended in Ukraine.
그런 패권주의 세력에 맞서서 자기 주권적 권리와 또 안전 이익과 이걸 수호하기 위해서 정의 위협을 벌이고 있는데 우리는 시정일관 러시아 정부 그당께서 취하시는 모든 조치에
On to the celebratory banquet and the requisite toast to friendship. It's all designed to show that neither one cares about Western condemnation. Mr. Kim's delegation was mainly military men. He said an agreement was reached to deepen strategic and tactical cooperation. In other words, a new military partnership. President Putin outlined a very military program for the next day or so.
Впереди у председателя большая программа. Он же отсюда еще летит в Комсомольск-на-Амуре, будет посещать заводы, где производится авиационная техника, и гражданская, и боевая. Затем будет во Владивостоке, и там тоже там такая военная часть по линии Министерства обороны. Но она заключается просто в демонстрации возможностей Тихоокеанского флота.
The Security Council will now begin.
The UN Security Council was meeting in New York. The US and its allies are concerned both about the impact on the war in Ukraine and any renewed threat from North Korea. But the summit also creates a dilemma for China.
Given China's influence over North Korea, the international community will demand China to rein in North Korea, and China has been sort of ambivalent about Russia's war in Ukraine, and obviously Beijing will try to keep a distance away from any of the arms deals reached between North Korea and Russia.
Remembrance of North Korean missile launches past. As if the Russian invasion of Ukraine hadn't destabilized the world enough, now potential escalation on the Korean peninsula provides a new threat to the fragile global order.
Lindsay Hilson reporting. Well, joining me now is Dr. John Park. He's director of the Korea Project at the Harvard Kennedy School and an expert on North Korea's military capabilities and nuclear ambitions. Thank you very much for coming back on the program, Dr. Park. I mean, the stuff that we've heard so far from the summit seems quite vague. What do you think that both Kim and Putin are actually getting out of this, other than the theatre that we saw today?
It looks very much like it's a problem-solving type of dynamic. Each leader is able to tap into unique capabilities and resources that the other can provide. In that respect, if you look at it, as we've heard in the news report there, for Putin, the difficulties on the battlefield of having limited stockpiles of munitions, Kim is a unique provider of that. If you look at the Soviet and then Russian compatibility with North Korea into the systems, you're looking at things that the North Koreans have developed based on original blueprints and products and assembly lines that came from Russia. On the North Korean side of the ledger, you're looking at difficulties that Kim has had with the Space Launch Vehicle program, getting what they call a military satellite into orbit. So I do feel that looking at the different pieces here, it's really rooted in a pragmatic, problem-solving type of dynamic.
So it's a perfect match in a way?
For the time being, and the results will show if they're going to get to the next level. But it is unique to see this type of meeting where it's not one where things are hammered out. For Kim, this is an opportunity to rebound from the debacle of Hanoi, where he went in the meeting with Trump, clearly didn't go the way that Kim wanted. But most importantly for him, casting a shadow in terms of his decision-making, his judgment. Here, this is something for North Korean domestic audience, but having this type of meeting with Putin is very important from that dynamic as well. So both leaders are getting very important type of dynamics and points, but largely for their respective domestic audiences.
Right, and in the eyes of the West, does it make both of them more dangerous to the West?
Well, if you look at the current situation, the limitations on munitions in the battlefield in Ukraine clearly was a difficult box that Putin was in. And there, I think with the different types of dynamics at play, there was this view that with a kind of looming war of attrition intensifying, that this type of limitation on munitions would keep Putin in that box. And then setbacks for Kim in terms of his space launch vehicle program, same type of box. So one thing to look at from an international perspective is that in helping each other, they're essentially creating local opportunities for itself that doesn't bode well. And I think the China and U.S. angles to this in a period where U.S.-China competition and intensifying tensions overall are growing, this is one unique area where China and the United States can try to figure out a way to cooperate, because it is something that would adversely affect their national interests as well.
But to put it bluntly, North Korea could help Russia win the war in Ukraine.
I do think the focus is a lot of my colleagues who are covering this very closely. The war of attrition, dragging it out, the Putin calculation that the longer he drags it out, the more this unity of effort in supporting Ukraine will deteriorate. And North Korea would be an important part of that puzzle.
And just very briefly, are the Russians using North Korea and indeed the Chinese as a kind of attack dog against the West?
I think right now the immediate one is filling gaps. And so with technology that basically goes back to the First World War, artillery shells, you're looking at a unique type of hole that the North Koreans can help fill for the time being. But there will be efforts, and I think we'll probably see early indications of this as well, expanding North Korean production facilities in these areas as well, if this is that type of protracted war of attrition. So North Korea plays an important part, but it's really the long game.
Right. Okay. Dr. Parks, thank you very much indeed.